the precise, irrevocable instant when Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comprehended that she had unwittingly stepped into a calculated execution rather than a standard televised town hall, was marked not by a sudden shout or a hostile jeer from the audience, but by a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the expression of the man sitting across from her. Kash Patel did not offer the customary plastic smile that Washington politicians deploy like defensive shields to mask their true intent. Instead, he offered a slight, tight-lipped expression that lacked any warmth whatsoever, the distinctive, predatory look of a seasoned federal prosecutor who has just quietly locked the courtroom doors and is preparing to introduce the one piece of evidence that will dismantle a defendant's carefully constructed alibi forever. She had arrived at the NewsNation America Speaks event, carrying her usual aura of invincibility, a confidence bolstered by 3 years of fawning media coverage and an army of millions on social media who regarded her every digital pronouncement as unassailable scripture. She had meticulously prepared her standard talking points regarding billionaire sycophants and the perceived moral failures of late-stage capitalism, and she had even rehearsed her expression of righteous indignation in the mirror of the green room, perfecting the furrowed brow that signaled deep empathy. Furthermore, she had coordinated her attire with strategic precision, pairing a sharp designer blazer over a message-bearing t-shirt designed specifically to maximize engagement on Instagram. However, Kash Patel had arrived equipped with a markedly different arsenal: an iPad, a leather portfolio filled with verified documentation, and 15 years of experience as a national security official and federal prosecutor, who had built a career outmaneuvering individuals who believed they were the smartest people in the room. What transpired over the subsequent 90 minutes would evolve into the most viewed political dismantling of the year and marked the final occasion the Congresswoman agreed to debate an opponent outside of her carefully controlled environments. For those who have ever speculated about the outcome when performative social media activism collides with hard, verified facts, or when viral tweets are confronted by cold documentary evidence, the events of that evening provided a definitive, brutal answer. The stage was arranged with deceptive simplicity, featuring 2 chairs angled toward one another with a moderator's desk positioned between them, facing a live studio audience of 200 individuals carefully selected to represent a balance of conservatives, liberals, and the politically unaffiliated. Although NewsNation had promoted the event as the Great Debate, populism versus the establishment, that framing had already irked both participants for differing reasons. AOC took her seat first, adjusting her lapel microphone with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to countless interviews, and offered the audience a rehearsed, relatable smile intended to convey solidarity, despite the stark contrast between her high-end wardrobe and the average attire of the attendees. A smattering of applause greeted her, to which she waved with a practiced grace. Patel walked out to a noticeably louder reception, which seemed to catch the producers off guard. He took his seat, placed his leather portfolio on the small side table with a deliberate heaviness, and nodded to the moderator with a professional courtesy born of years spent in courtrooms and classified briefings. The moderator, Sarah Chen, regarded both candidates with the wary expression of a host who sensed that the atmospheric pressure in the room was dropping rapidly, signaling an approaching storm. Before the formal proceedings could even commence, AOC interrupted the initial pleasantries, immediately pivoting to her offensive strategy by stating that she found the very existence of the debate interesting, asserting that individuals like Kash Patel represented everything erroneous about the modern American political landscape. She launched into a monologue characterizing him as a subservient defender of the 1%, a man who prioritized corporate profits over the protection of working families and a symbol of the corruption she was elected to fight. She was roughly 45 seconds into her standard stump speech, the rhythm of her rhetoric rising, when Patel raised his hand with the calm authority of a tenured professor correcting a freshman's factual error. He apologized for the interruption, but requested permission to ask a singular, brief question before she continued with her prepared attacks. Sarah Chen looked momentarily confused, as this deviation was not in the script, and the producers in the control room hesitated. But Patel turned directly to AOC, locking eyes with her, and inquired simply how she had arrived at the studio that evening. The banality of the question seemed to throw her off balance. She blinked in confusion, her rhythm broken, and replied dismissively that she had driven, implying the question was a waste of valuable airtime. Patel pressed further, his voice dropping an octave, asking why she had chosen to drive that particular vehicle. He was already tapping his iPad, and the large screen behind them, intended for general graphics, suddenly illuminated with a high-resolution image of a blue Model 3 Tesla valued at approximately $47,000. The image caused AOC's expression to flicker with the first sign of genuine concern, a dawning realization that this event was drifting away from her control. Patel displayed the photo to the audience and cameras, noting with a dry, factual tone that it was undeniably her exiting the vehicle in the parking structure just 20 minutes prior. He complimented the car's design before she defensively interjected that it was an electric vehicle and therefore better for the environment, attempting to regain the moral high ground. Patel continued without pausing, his voice smooth and relentless, noting that the vehicle was manufactured by Tesla Incorporated, a company led by CEO Elon Musk, a man she had tweeted about 47 times in the last 2 years alone. As Patel tapped his iPad again, the screen behind them shifted to display a comprehensive, scrolling compilation of her tweets regarding Elon Musk. The audience watched in silence as her own words filled the room, descriptions of Musk as an oligarch, a union buster, a threat to democracy, and a billionaire toying with humanity's future. Patel allowed the silence to stretch for a moment, letting the audience absorb the visual evidence of her digital vitriol. He then leaned forward, clasping his hands together, and highlighted the contradiction with surgical precision. He noted that while she had utilized the strongest possible rhetoric to label Musk a danger to the Republic, she drove his car daily, thereby contributing an estimated $5,000 in profit directly to the pocket of the man she claimed to despise. The audience fell silent, leaning forward as the narrative shifted unexpectedly from policy to personal integrity. When AOC attempted to recover by reiterating the environmental benefits, claiming the climate crisis superseded corporate critiques, Patel gently interrupted to suggest the subway as an alternative. He pointed out that the subway ran merely 2 blocks from her apartment in the Navy Yard, and that she represented the Bronx and Queens, areas that boasted some of the finest public transit networks in the nation. He pointed out the profound irony that her party advocates for mass transit and the reduction of personal vehicle usage for the masses. Yet she utilizes a luxury personal vehicle to fight for the working class. When a stifled laugh emerged from the back of the audience, AOC appealed to the moderator, her voice rising in pitch, labeling the discussion ridiculous and arguing they should be discussing systemic hypocrisy rather than her personal commuting habits. Patel calmly replied that they were indeed discussing exactly that: systemic hypocrisy embodied in leadership. He leaned forward, adopting a conversational tone akin to explaining a difficult concept to a colleague, and expressed his confusion regarding her political brand. He noted that her entire identity was built on attacking billionaires and the evil 1%. Yet her personal consumer habits, buying Musk's car, shopping at Amazon for convenience, and tweeting from a $3 trillion Apple iPhone, served only to enrich the very class she claimed to be warring against. He asked, rhetorically, how she reconciled the fact that her lifestyle was funded by and supported the very corporate structures she deemed immoral. Before she could formulate a rebuttal, he transitioned seamlessly to the topic of her income. He noted that her base congressional salary of $174,000 placed her firmly in the top 10% of American earners, meaning she earned more than 90% of the people she claimed to represent. As AOC's face began to flush with frustration, she argued that she did not control her congressional salary and that living in Washington, D.C. was expensive. But Patel countered that she kept all of it. He pointed out that despite advocating for wealth redistribution and higher taxes on the rich, a category she statistically occupied, there was no record of her voluntarily returning any portion of her salary to the Treasury or donating the present excess to the social programs she championed. He sat back in his chair, spreading his hands in a gesture of openness, and suggested that perhaps the issue was not billionaires, but rather politicians who built lucrative careers attacking success while personally enjoying its benefits. He implied with devastating clarity that she was not actually opposed to capitalism itself, but merely resentful that others were succeeding at it on a larger scale than she was. The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum in the room where her usual slogans would have normally echoed. The moderator, sensing the tension, asked if the Congresswoman wished to respond. AOC opened her mouth, then closed it, her mind racing for a soundbite that would cut through the logic. But eventually, she dismissed the points as typical right-wing distraction tactics and ad hominem attacks designed to distract from the real issues. Patel mildly responded by asking which part was personal, considering he had merely quoted her public tweets and cited her public salary, all of which were matters of public record. This was merely the first round, the opening salvo of a bombardment she was unprepared for, and Patel teased the audience by looking directly into the camera and suggesting they wait for the evidence regarding the Met Gala. Attempting to regain control, AOC pivoted to her greatest hits, the viral moments that had established her brand, asserting that she was unafraid to make bold statements about inequality and to make people uncomfortable, unlike those who defended the status quo. She was obviously referring to the Met Gala, a topic her team had likely advised her to embrace as a display of courage. Patel smiled with a look that suggested she had made a tactical error, expressing his genuine desire to discuss that specific event. As AOC's confidence faltered, realizing she may have walked into a trap, Patel confirmed they were discussing the September 2021 gala and her Tax the Rich dress. When AOC claimed she brought her message to millionaires eating $500 plates of food, Patel finished her sentence, causing a reaction from the audience that hovered between laughter and shock. Ignoring the moderator's attempt to intervene, Patel pressed on, asking her to describe the event and, specifically, the cost of her ticket. When she stated she was invited and did not pay, Patel revealed the price from the Met Gala's website: $35,000 for an individual ticket and $270,000 for a table. He let the figure of $35,000 hang in the air, emphasizing that a single ticket to that party cost more than half the median household income in her district. Patel then displayed statistics on the screen showing the economic reality of her district in the Bronx: an average household income of $38,000, a poverty rate of 28%, and severe food insecurity. He drew a stark contrast between her constituents, who were choosing between rent and food, and her attendance at a $35,000 dinner wearing a designer dress to lecture the wealthy. When AOC insisted she was given access, Patel demanded to know who paid, explaining that as a federal employee, she was prohibited from accepting gifts over $50 from prohibited sources, implying she had either violated ethics rules or was withholding the donor's identity. Moving on before she could formulate a defense, Patel addressed the dress itself. He noted that the designer received millions in free publicity and a massive spike in sales from AOC's appearance, pointing out the thick irony of wearing a Tax the Rich dress that enriched a luxury designer at an event for the ultra-wealthy, paid for by an unnamed donor. When AOC claimed she was trying to make a statement, Patel corrected her, asserting she was trying to go viral, and noted she had succeeded by posting 37 carefully curated photos that night, spending more time taking selfies than her constituents would spend eating that week. He concluded this segment by stating that this behavior was not activism or politics, but rather personal brand building, characterizing her as an influencer with a vote in Congress. The debate had now shifted into a rhythm that felt less like a political exchange and more like a surgical dissection of a carefully curated persona. Patel did not raise his voice. He did not resort to name-calling or the bombastic rhetoric that characterizes so much of modern cable news. Instead, he operated with the cold, methodical efficiency of an auditor discovering fraud in the ledger of a public company. Every time AOC attempted to launch one of her signature slogans, phrases that had garnered millions of likes on Twitter and had been printed on tote bags sold on her campaign website, Patel would counter not with a slogan of his own, but with a receipt, a document, a photograph, a piece of legislative history. He was dismantling the gap between the digital avatar AOC and the physical reality of the Congresswoman sitting in the chair. The audience, initially split in their sympathies, was now palpably uncomfortable, witnessing the kind of public undressing that usually occurs only in nightmares. It was at this juncture that Patel pulled out a folder labeled The Green New Deal, a fiscal autopsy. The room went silent. This was her signature legislative proposal, the bedrock of her political identity, the document that had catapulted her to global fame. AOC straightened in her chair, seeing a chance to move the conversation back to policy, to the moral high ground of saving the planet. "Let's discuss your signature legislative proposal," Vance said, placing the 14-page resolution on the podium. "I've read it multiple times. I've studied it. I've analyzed it. And I have to say, Congresswoman, it reads like a college freshman's wish list written after binge-watching MSNBC and assuming money grows on trees." AOC bristled, her eyes narrowing. "It is a framework for survival," she shot back, her voice regaining some of its fire. "It is a bold vision for a future where we don't destroy our own home." Patel opened the folder, revealing pages covered in highlighted text and handwritten calculations. "Let's talk about the math," he said, which apparently wasn't covered thoroughly enough at Boston University. He cited cost estimates from the American Action Forum, which calculated the cost at $93 trillion over 10 years. Even the most charitable conservative estimates put it at $51 trillion, Patel noted. Current federal revenue is approximately $4.5 trillion per year. Your proposal costs more than all federal revenue combined. You're already $6 trillion short, and that's assuming we spend $0 on defense, Social Security, or Medicare. He read directly from the resolution text, quoting the guarantee of a job with a family-sustaining wage to all people of the United States. "That's a federal jobs guarantee for 330 million people," he explained. "Even if only half the population wants these guaranteed jobs, that's 165 million federal jobs. The entire current federal workforce is about 2 million. You're proposing to increase it by 80-fold. He flipped pages rapidly, quoting sections about providing high-quality health care, clean water, clean air, healthy and affordable food, and nature to all people. "How do you propose to guarantee nature to all people?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Is the federal government going to mail everyone a tree?" The audience chuckled, a sound that cut deeper than any insult. He then found the section on guaranteeing economic security to all who are unable or unwilling to work. "Unwilling to work?" he repeated slowly. "You're proposing to pay people who choose not to work. That's not a social safety net. That's paying people to do nothing." He then produced the infamous Frequently Asked Questions document her office had released and subsequently deleted, reading the section about farting cows and replacing airplanes with high-speed rail. "You wanted to build out high-speed rail at a scale where air travel stops becoming necessary, he read. How exactly do you take a train from New York to Hawaii? Or to Europe? Did you think we'd build trains across the Pacific Ocean? The engineering assessments came next. Patel explained that retrofitting every building in America within 10 years would require rebuilding 37,000 buildings every single day for 10 years straight, a physical impossibility given the current labor force and material supply. He showed studies on the energy grid, noting that eliminating fossil fuels in 10 years would require rebuilding the entire infrastructure of the United States on a timeline that defied physics. Finally, he played his ace. The legislative record. Senate vote on the Green New Deal resolution, he announced. 0 Republicans voted yes. How many Democrats voted yes? 0. Not a single Democrat voted for it. Even Nancy Pelosi mocked it. You tied your brand to a proposal so unrealistic that even your allies abandoned it. He looked at her with a mix of pity and severity. Bold doesn't mean ignoring math, physics, and reality. Your proposal isn't bold. It's delusional. It would cost more than we have, build more than we can, and guarantee things that can't be guaranteed. It is performance art masquerading as policy. In quote, the studio atmosphere, which had been charged with the electric crackle of intellectual combat during the dissection of the Green New Deal, now settled into a heavier, more suffocating silence as Kash Patel deliberately closed the folder on climate policy and reached for a dossier that appeared significantly thicker. This was the pivot point of the evening, the moment where the abstract numbers of trillions of dollars were exchanged for the visceral, tangible reality of personal hypocrisy. Patel did not immediately speak. He allowed the weight of the previous round to settle on the audience, letting them sit with the realization that the grandest legislative proposal of the century was, in his analysis, little more than an architectural fiction. When he finally looked up, his gaze was not predatory, but almost clinical, like a surgeon preparing to excise a malignant tumor that had wrapped itself around a vital organ. We have discussed your policies, Congresswoman, Patel began, his voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute attention. Now, I believe it is imperative that we discuss the architecture of your persona. You have built a political empire on the premise that you are a champion of the working class, a bartender who stormed the gates of power to fight for the marginalized against the elite. Let us examine the fidelity of that narrative. He tapped his iPad, and the screen behind them shifted from legislative text to a photograph that had saturated the global consciousness only a few months prior. It was an image of AOC at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, her silhouette framed by the flashing bulbs of the paparazzi, the white fabric of her gown cascading down the red carpet, emblazoned with the crimson letters, "Tax the Rich." A few supporters in the audience began to clap tentatively, recognizing the viral moment, but Patel's next words cut the applause short. The Met Gala, he stated flatly, the single most exclusive, aristocratic social event in the Western Hemisphere, a gathering not of the people, but of the very oligarchs, hedge fund managers, and celebrity elites you claim to despise. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. Tell me, Congresswoman, in your fight for the working class, how exactly does sipping champagne with Jeff Bezos and the Kardashians advance the cause of the Bronx? AOC straightened, her defense ready. I was there to send a message, she retorted, her voice sharp. I brought the message of the working class into the den of the lion. It was about making them uncomfortable in their own space. It was a symbol. Patel nodded slowly, as if he had expected precisely that answer. A symbol, he repeated. Let's discuss the cost of that symbol. He consulted his notes. Tickets to the Met Gala that evening cost $35,000 per person. Tables cost upwards of $270,000. The median annual household income in your district, the people you represent, is approximately $38,000. You spent an evening at a party where the price of admission was equivalent to what a family of 4 in the Bronx survives on for an entire year. "I didn't pay for the ticket," she interjected, sensing the trap closing. "I was invited. I was a guest." "And that," Patel said, leaning forward, "is precisely the problem." He pulled a document from his portfolio. House ethics rules explicitly prohibit members of Congress from accepting gifts valued at over $50 from prohibited sources. Yet, you accepted a $35,000 gift. From whom? A designer? A corporation? A media conglomerate? You claim to be unbought, yet you walked the red carpet as a walking billboard for a luxury fashion house that sells handbags costing more than your constituents' rent. He gestured to the screen where the dress was still displayed. "This wasn't a protest, Congresswoman. This was an audition. You weren't crashing the party. You were desperate to be part of it. You wore a costume of rebellion while participating in the ultimate celebration of excess. You didn't tax the rich that night. You entertained them." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Patel did not let up. He transitioned immediately, stripping away the layers of her backstory with the efficiency of an investigative journalist. "This disconnect is not new," he continued. "It is the foundational flaw of your brand. You tell a story of the girl from the Bronx, the struggling bartender. But that is a curated fiction." He brought up a new set of images. A modest but comfortable suburban home in Yorktown Heights, Westchester County. You didn't grow up fighting for survival in the inner city. You grew up here, Westchester County, one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. Your father was an architect. You attended Yorktown High School, a school with immense resources, far removed from the crumbling infrastructure of the district you now represent. "I worked as a bartender to help my mother," AOC cried out, her composure fracturing. "I know what it means to stand on my feet for 12 hours a day." "I don't doubt you worked hard," Patel conceded, his voice remaining terrifyingly calm. "Millions of Americans work hard, but you use that brief period of your life as a shield to deflect valid criticism of your current reality. You wear your bartending days like a Purple Heart, demanding deference because you once poured drinks, but look at you now." He gestured to her, then to the screen which now displayed her current residence. "You live in a luxury apartment building in Navy Yard. Rooftop pool, concierge, Peloton studio, Whole Foods in the lobby. You earn $174,000 a year, placing you in the top 10% of earners in this country. You are not the working class anymore, Congresswoman. You are the gentrifier. You are the elite. And the tragedy is that you are seemingly the only person in this room who doesn't realize it." If the dissection of her lifestyle was a surgical strike, what came next was a blunt force trauma. Patel closed the dossier on her apartment and opened a file that contained a series of printed tweets and a GoFundMe page. The mood in the room shifted from uncomfortable to ominous. "Let us talk about authenticity," Patel said, his voice dropping to a whisper that forced the audience to lean in. "Let us talk about your grandmother." On the screen appeared the tweets from June 2021, photos of a dilapidated home in Puerto Rico, the ceiling caving in, buckets catching rainwater. AOC's own caption blamed the Trump administration for the neglect, a searing indictment of systemic failure. "You posted these photos," Patel said, shaming the government for failing your abuela. "You used her suffering to score political points against a president who had already left office. It was a powerful narrative. It garnered hundreds of thousands of likes." He paused. And then, something extraordinary happened. Matt Walsh, a conservative commentator, a man you label a fascist, saw the photos. And instead of mocking you, he organized a fundraiser. Patel held up the printout of the GoFundMe campaign. In 24 hours, everyday Americans, mostly conservatives, the people you despise, donated $104,000. $104,000. Enough to fix the roof, repair the floors, and ensure your grandmother lived in dignity for the rest of her life. Patel looked at her, his eyes hardening. And what did you do? AOC remained silent, her jaw set. You shut it down, Patel answered for her. You refused the money. You contacted GoFundMe and had the campaign terminated. You rejected $100,000 of aid for your own grandmother because it came from the wrong kind of people. You decided that your grandmother's suffering was less important than your political pride. He slammed the paper down on the table, a rare display of emotion. Think about the cruelty of that decision. You have a salary that could have fixed that roof. You didn't do it. Strangers offered to fix it. You stopped them. Why? Because if the problem was solved, you couldn't tweet about it anymore. You needed her to be a victim, so you could be a savior. That isn't leadership, Congresswoman. That is exploitation. You sacrificed your own family's well-being on the altar of your political brand. The audience was dead silent. There was no applause, no murmurs, only the shock of witnessing a moral indictment so complete that it left no room for rebuttal. AOC attempted to stammer a response about the tainted nature of the money, about not wanting to be a pawn in a right-wing game, but the words turned to ash in her mouth. The visual evidence, the rotting ceiling versus the rejected check, was too stark. Patel watched her struggle, then delivered the final verdict of this segment. You claim to love the poor, Congresswoman, but this incident proved something else entirely. You don't love the poor. You just hate the rich. And you hate them so much that you would let your own grandmother live in squalor rather than accept their help. That is not a champion of the people. That is a narcissist with a Twitter account. As the producers signaled for a commercial break, the camera lingered on AOC's face. The defiant spark was gone, replaced by a haunting realization that the narrative she had spun for 3 years was unraveling thread by thread on national television. And Patel, organizing his papers for the final round, was not done yet. If the previous rounds had been a dismantling of character, the final segment of the evening was a demolition of competence. The emotional weight of the grandmother incident still hung heavy in the studio air, a thick cloud of discomfort that AOC could not seem to dispel when Kash Patel reached beneath the podium for the final time. He did not retrieve a thin document or a single photograph. Instead, he lifted a heavy bound binder labeled Economic Impact Assessment, Amazon HQ2. The sound of the binder hitting the table echoed like a gavel strike. This was the specific economic blunder that had defined AOC's early career, a decision she had celebrated as a victory, but which Patel was about to reveal as a catastrophic failure of governance. Let us talk about job creation, Patel began, opening the binder with a deliberate slowness that suggested he knew exactly where the bodies were buried. Or rather, let us talk about job destruction. In 2019, Amazon planned to build a second headquarters in Long Island City, right on the edge of your district. It was the single largest economic development deal in the history of New York. It promised 25,000 jobs. These were not minimum wage positions. The average salary was projected to be $150,000 a year. It meant construction jobs, service industry expansion, and billions in tax revenue for the city. He looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. But you fought it. You led the charge to kill the deal. And when Amazon finally pulled out, taking those jobs to Virginia, you celebrated. You tweeted that you had saved New York City $3 billion. You claimed that money could now be invested in subways, schools, and teachers. Patel lowered his reading glasses and looked at her with an expression that was less anger and more profound pity. Congresswoman, this statement exposes a fundamental, disqualifying lack of financial literacy. You operated under the belief that the city was writing a check for $3 billion to Jeff Bezos. You seemingly believed there was a pile of cash sitting in a vault that, if not given to Amazon, could be simply taken and given to the subway system. He leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp and didactic. That is not how tax incentives work. That $3 billion was a discount on the $27 billion in tax revenue Amazon would have paid over time. The money did not exist yet. You cannot spend a discount. By killing the deal, you didn't save $3 billion. You cost the city $27 billion in lost future revenue. You cost your constituents 25,000 careers. You cost the local deli owners, the dry cleaners, and the truck drivers the economic boom they were banking on. AOC attempted to interject, raising her voice to decry corporate welfare. We shouldn't be giving handouts to the richest man in the world when our schools are crumbling. It wasn't a handout, Patel snapped back, his patience finally fraying. It was an investment. If I offer you a 10% discount to buy a car from my dealership and you walk away, I didn't save the discount money. I lost the sale. You treated the economy of the greatest city in the world like a zero-sum game because you do not understand how wealth is created. You think wealth is something you confiscate. I know wealth is something you build. And because of your economic illiteracy, 25,000 families in New York do not have paychecks today. Amazon went to Virginia. Virginia got the jobs. Virginia got the tax revenue. And what did New York get? We got nothing. The subways didn't get fixed. The schools didn't get funded. Because you chased away the very revenue stream that would have paid for them. The camera panned to the audience. A man in the second row, wearing a Union jacket, was nodding vigorously, his face grim. Patel had successfully turned her victory into an indictment, but he was not finished. He moved immediately to the final stack of papers, the darkest chapter of her tenure. Let us talk about safety, Patel said, his tone turning cold. Let us talk about your advocacy to defund the police. He pulled out a series of enlarged tweets from 2020. While American cities were burning, while small businesses were being looted and destroyed, you were cheering on the defund movement. You said, quote, defunding police means defunding police. You argued that cutting law enforcement budgets would somehow make communities safer. You famously claimed that people were only shoplifting because they were hungry. Stealing bread to feed their families, I believe was your phrase. Patel pulled out the NYPD crime statistics for her own district in the Bronx and Queens. Let us look at the empirical results of your philosophy. Since the defund movement began, a movement you championed, shootings in New York City doubled. Murders went up nearly 40%. Transit crimes spiked. And who suffers the most? Is it the billionaires in their penthouses? No. It is the working-class minorities in your district. The very people you claim to represent are the ones bleeding in the streets because you vilified the police who protect them. He paused, letting the grim statistics sink in, before delivering the coup de grace. And here is the height of hypocrisy. Here is where the performance becomes offensive. While you were calling to defund the police for everyone else, while you were stripping protection from the subway riders and the bodega owners, you voted to increase funding for your own protection. He held up a federal spending report, highlighted in neon yellow. You spent thousands of campaign dollars on private security. You have armed guards. The Capitol Police protect you. You live behind a wall of security that the taxpayers fund. Patel looked directly at the audience, ignoring her completely now. This is the pattern. She wants you to give up your car, but she drives a Tesla. She wants you to give up your gas stove, but she eats in luxury restaurants. She wants you to live without police protection, but she hires private security. It is rules for thee, but not for me. She is safe. Her constituents are not. That isn't justice, Congresswoman. That is aristocracy. The debate was effectively over. The energy in the room had shifted from curiosity to condemnation. All that remained was the epitaph. Patel gathered the papers into a neat pile, the sound of the pages settling marking the end of the onslaught. He looked at AOC, not with anger anymore, but with a calm, decisive finality. We have spent the last 90 minutes peeling back the layers of your political brand, Patel said quietly. And what have we found underneath? He counted off on his fingers, each point a nail in the coffin of her political persona. We found a Green New Deal that is mathematically and physically impossible, written by someone who doesn't understand the energy grid. We found a working-class champion who lives in a luxury apartment, wears designer clothes, and attends the Met Gala with the very elites she claims to hate. We found a granddaughter who used her abuela's suffering for a photo op, then refused help because it came from the wrong political side. We found an economic theorist who chased 25,000 jobs out of her own city because she didn't understand how taxes work. And we found a politician who demands we defund the police for our families while she hides behind armed guards for herself. Patel placed his hands on the podium, leaning in for the final sentence that would dominate the news cycle for weeks. But perhaps the most damning statistic is this one. He pointed to a single sheet of paper. You have been in Congress for nearly 2 terms. You have millions of followers. You have appeared on every magazine cover. But in terms of actual legislation, laws passed to help your constituents, your number is 0. You have passed 0 laws. You are not a revolutionary congresswoman. You are a product. You are a creation of social media algorithms designed to generate outrage and engagement, but completely incapable of governing. You offer slogans, not solutions. You offer performance, not policy. You are the perfect politician for the Instagram age. Pretty filters, catchy captions, and absolutely no substance. He picked up his notepad and turned to walk away, pausing for one final line that silenced the room completely. America doesn't need influencers. America needs leaders. And until you learn the difference between a retweet and a result, you have no business holding that seat. Patel walked off the stage. The silence was deafening, broken only by the stunned gasp of a devastating reality setting in. The credits rolled, but the damage was permanent. The era of the influencer politician had collided with reality, and reality had won.